in this country, people have been led to believe that inside the country it was virtually invincible. They came to expect controversy and conflict in Russia, Europe, even among the Basques in Spain, among Protestants and Christian Catholics in Ireland. They thought that there could be conflict and trouble. The Civil War in this country was a bit different, but they could anticipate the level of destruction that was likely to take place. They knew how fast the ships could go. They knew the weight of the bombs. So in general, they told the people in New York, in New England, you're safe. This war will be in the South. So people are seeing the economy change. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but constant change. But September the 11th ushered in an event that is likely to change the future of this country structurally in a way that life may never return to what it was before September the 11th. I came today because as I was traveling, reading, and watching television, I was looking for the Muslims to see who would stand up and tell the truth. So either I tuned in at the wrong time, or I wasn't able to understand what was being said. Because there were Jews on television talking to Jews, outlining the problem and the basis for expectation. I think Reverend Fodwell decided to speak to the Christians, accompanied by Reverend Pat Robinson. And I watched and I listened because I want knowledge. But of course I was looking to see when the Muslims would stand. Now I understand that with the hysteria that's going on now, people are a little reluctant to be heard. This is the time when people want to be quiet. They want to walk very, very quietly. They do not want cameras and attention focused on them. I had the opportunity to see Congresswoman Maxine Waters on television. Maxine tends to be very volatile. She is able to contort her face in a way to convey rage. Now on CNN, they introduced Maxine and they said, one of the reasons that we want you, because we know that you have always had the courage to challenge anyone, especially if they were Republican. Now, based upon the posture of Congress, based upon the statements of the President of the United States, we would like to ask you, do you agree or disagree with the programs put forth by the President and the Congress? Sister Maxine Waters said, I agree with everything. In ACP, you haven't heard them. Urban League, you haven't heard them. This is serious. So people say we have to now be intelligent and expedient. Just be quiet because nerves are on edge as never before. Now with that in mind, the delicacy of the situation, I want to at least tell you what I prepared. If I don't get a chance to give my address, I want you to know I prepared an address. In the first place, I would like to talk about being brain dead in the context of the 21st century New World Order, the globalization process. How's that going to affect your state of brain deadness? And if you're brain dead, who will pull the plug? I want to convey as clearly as I can what constitutes globalization. These words are used a lot, and frequently we don't know what they mean because people mean different things. We don't want to ask them because we're afraid they may think that we're stupid or uninformed. But I like to ask. We are told that we're living in a world that's becoming globalized. Is that good or bad? Shall I be frightened? Shall I be happy? I want to know. It is my opinion that when you look at globalization, you're going to be looking at life and institutions that have come from human beings. What are those institutions? Well, we can talk about 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. I want to just use 6. Otherwise, I would have to ask you to stay for maybe a month. I want to try to take 6 basic institutions, and I want everyone in this audience to remember each one. I don't want this to be like church. When you go to church and you meet your friends, and they say, "What did Reverend preach about today?" And the answer is, "I don't know, but he sure did preach." I want you to know. We're talking about 6 basic institutions. One is religion. Another one is intellectual or education. One is social. One is economic. One is political. And the last one is cultural. Now this is how you remember it. The first thing you say to yourself is rise, PC. PC you've heard a lot, that's personal computer. Rise, PC. Let me hear you say that. Rise, PC. You sound a little reticent. This is not an examination, there's no quiz. Just say, rise, PC. Rise, PC. That's it. So when someone said, Khalid Abdullah Tariq al-Mansour came to talk to you, what did he say? In your mind, you say, rise, PC. While you're thinking about that, let me just tell you what my name means. You don't have to memorize this. Khalid means eternal. Abdullah means the slave of God. Tariq means the straight path. And El-Mansour means the victorious. So whether you love me or you hate me, if you call my whole name, Khalid, Abdullah, Tariq, El-Mansour, it reminds me that if I am eternally the slave of God and I follow the right path, I will always be victorious. So you encourage me and you don't even know it. But what does Smith mean? What does Jackson mean? I'm told some people say, well, these are Christian names. Then find them in the Bible. They're not in the Bible. They're just European names. And we got them because they were the names of the slave master, and it was like branding cattle. When you gave the name to the slave, that let the world know, this is my slave. Now I can understand after 1 or 2 generations after slavery, we kept those names. Custom, habit, and we didn't know any better. But in the year 2001, to have those same names, and blacks will almost kill you before they will give up those names. So we want now to look a little bit at Rise PC. The religious institution simply means that in a monotheistic world, 3 dominant religions have emerged. There's a lot of similarity between them. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. A belief in one God. In our investigation of human beings from the earliest of times, we cannot say definitively whether or not man and women have inherent in them a belief in God. But we have not been able to find tribes in the world, civilizations in the world, where there is not a prevailing belief in God. Some anthropologists say that belief developed because of man's fear. Earthquakes, tornadoes, people dying unexpectedly. So they wanted to explain these events. And religion made them feel better and stronger. That's one point of view. Another point of view is that belief in God is so widespread that perhaps it's inherent in the human being. I happen to believe it is inherent. That's one of the institutions that we want to look at. Educational institution is a very important institution. It came about because when humans came onto the planet, they had one major instinct: to survive. Survive. And it's because of this instinct that you eat. Can you imagine being born into the world and not eating? The instinct of survival propels you to take in nutrients. Then you start teaching your children about eating, because trial and error. Sometimes you ate things and got sick. So education says to your child, don't eat that. It is my belief that God Allah provided you with neurons and nerves and sensitivity connectors. So smell and taste help to warn you of things that are bad. At the same time, they will encourage you toward things that are good for nutrition. And then the family starts teaching. Because because you want to survive. So education becomes important. If you're going to hunt animals or grow crops, after you learn through trial and error, you don't want your children to grow up and go through the same process. It may have taken you 8 or 9 years to master all of the technique. Why have your children go through the same thing? So parents tend to teach their children. Say, trust me. It may not seem right. Trust me. I've been through it. Avoid this and pursue this. Education. A basic institution. The social institution is just family. Individuals. Again, the desire to survive. So I may have 2 or 3 children, and you have to think about the early civilization. Maybe 1, maybe 2 million years ago, maybe 3 million years ago. And I may have 3 or 4 or 5 children. And I may not have any neighbors. It may take me a month or a week or 6 months to get to the closest neighbor, because this is a big planet. Just Africa alone. If you take India, China, Western Europe, and America, and put them all together, they fit inside of Africa. The great continent. Therefore, wild animals, and maybe strangers who intend mischief, who come and they may attack some of my family, I start saying inside, I wish I had a larger family. I wish I had some kinfolks, extended family. So next time the wild animals come, or the predators come, I say, come on, bring what you got. Because I feel now comfortable, I feel secure, because I'm looking at my family, and my extended family, my relatives. So you hear people say, don't mess with family. That's all the social institution is. It's a family. And it starts getting larger and larger. It becomes a clan, then it becomes a tribe. And it may end up being a nation. It can even be an empire. It is an institution that is critical to survival. It also can produce joy. Now, these institutions overlap. But I'm trying now to provide you with the basis. Rise, PC. The next one is economics. That talks about what kind of land do you have. Early humans were either farmers or they were hunting for animals to get protein, or a combination. That was the basis of the economy. So you're looking at what is the material, what is the machinery, is there any medium of exchange like money? That's what economics is all about. And you have to know that to be able to adjust, survive, and to prosper in the 21st century. Some of your leaders don't think that you are intelligent enough to understand economics. I know you are. I know you can understand the institution of religion, the institution of education, the social institution, the economic institution, and the political institution is leadership. When you hear rumors, who can you turn to? When you have problems, who can you turn to? What are the policies? What are the rules? What are the penalties if you mess up? That's the politics. Do you see how easy it is? Now, after politics, we have one left. C. That's culture. What are your values? So when someone says to you, look, what did that guy talk about? That Khalid, Tariq, Mansour. Say, look here, he talked about rise PC. Religion, education or intellectual, social, economic, political, and cultural. Now let's go to the next step, because now we're on the same page. What I've just taught you, they teach you at the university. I don't care whether you've been at the university or not. If your mind is open, you will have knowledge. Now these institutions start getting bigger and stronger, but they were clashing. Because if I worship the stars and the moon and the mountains, and you worship the earth, and we got together and start bragging, and you say, I'm so sorry my mother died. I said, if you'd been worshiping the earth, your mother wouldn't have died. Because the earth took care of my mother. And ego comes in, conflict comes in, you have fighting. So institutions are continually clashing. As they clash, some of the ingredients disappears. Some gets bigger and stronger. But these institutions are looking for dominance. They want to get bigger and stronger and stronger. Now, in our life, it's different because the pace is now so fast. Things used to go very, very slow. You can remember from one Ramadan to the next Ramadan, it seemed like forever. Today, from one Ramadan to the next Ramadan, it's like a week or a month or a year. If human civilization is 3 or 4 million years old, the progress has been very slow. The earth was so large, you didn't encounter conflict on a daily basis. You had to chase animals in order to get food. But you learned to go to the watering hole instead of chasing animals all over the globe. You go to the water because sooner or later the animals had to come to the water. So you waited there. And you passed that knowledge on to your children. So as these institutions started to clash, as more humans came onto the planet, as we got more crowded conditions, as we started more argumentation, we started fighting for turf. So this is my lane. These are my crops. These are my animals. Stay away. It reminded me of the Quran. When Allah made human beings. Now the Bible doesn't tell you what was the color of the material that produced mankind. The Quran does. In Hijrah, the 26th ayat or verse, it says that God made the first humans out of black clay. I didn't say that. Don't get mad at me. I did not say that. You go home and read it for yourself. If God made man out of black clay, what did he look like? Looked like me. Isn't that frightening? Now, if the Quran had said God made man out of white clay, white people would be Muslims. And every morning on television, when they say Good Morning America, they would quote that ayah, and Allah made the first humans out of white clay. But when we hear it, we don't believe it. It's just a frightening thought that anyone would want us to be first. But I want want you to know that all of the archaeological evidence supports the view that first human life was in Africa. I have been trying to debate some of the professors who have questioned the origins of the first human family. And they won't debate. I started to sue them so I could take their deposition and cross-examine them. Because I can show in South Africa, 40 miles from Johannesburg, a cave where they found human bones and animal bones down in the bottom of that cave. And the animal bones were charred, and the human bones were not charred, which meant that the humans cooked animals. So the only question in my mind was, how long ago did the black man know how to cook animals? That's what I want to know. So the only way to find out is to take the potassium test or the carbon test and test the bones. They did that. And it came back approximately 2,600,000 years ago, we were cooking animals. In Ethiopia, they found Lucy. So they thought Lucy was about 4 million years old. In Kenya, they found 70% of a skeleton. Most of the things you see, like dinosaurs, they find 3 or 4 bones, and they start speculating. If the wrist is this size, then the shoulder must have been this size. They don't have the shoulder. They just start speculating. In this case, 70% of the skeleton was found. And Mr. Leakey happened to have been out of the country when it was found. It was found by a black scientist. And they dated 70%, including the skull. They found out that the young man died when he was 12 years of age. 1,600,000 years ago. You can begin to understand why during slavery, the only law that they passed related to you. If you raped a slave, it was all right. It was not terrorism. If you killed a slave, it's all right. If you sold a slave, it's all right. If you took the baby from the family, from the mother, and sold it so that you never saw the baby, that was not against the law. The only thing that was against the law was if you let the slave read or write. Now, if we were backward and ignorant in Africa, why would you pass a law preventing us from reading and writing? That would be the last thing we'd want to do if we were swinging in the trees like Tariq. But it's because the slave master knew of our history and background. And he knew that we would never be a slave unless you could erase from the mind the knowledge of your past. And I can prove it. There's a book called Christianity, Islam, and the African Race, written by Brother Blyden, Edward Wilmot Blyden, also known as Abdul Rahim. Brother Blyden grew up in the Virgin Islands. He was a smart young man. His family took him to Venezuela. We're talking now the early 19th century. In Venezuela, during one summer, he came back speaking Spanish fluently. His pastor told him, we need to get this gentleman educated. They brought him from the Virgin Islands to America. No school would let him in. The land of the free and the home of the brave. So they wanted to save face, so they sent Blyden to Liberia. Like Mr. Blyden went to Liberia knowing 2 languages, Spanish and English. Before he died, he knew 26 languages. How in the world could you learn 24 languages in Africa? He learned Arabic in 90 days. Then he went to Damascus to brush up on the accents. Then he went to Egypt to give lectures to the Egyptians in Arabic as to how to stop colloquializing the language. And when he saw the pyramids, he started to cry. He said, "Oh, black race, rise up and reclaim your faith." That had to be erased, or else you would have never been a slave. You would have been like the American Indians. They say, "Kill us first. We're not going to be a slave. This is our land. This is the number of years we've been here. You just got here and said that we got to be a slave, and if you want to rape our wife, you can, and we're supposed to say, 'Thank you, Jesus.'" That's not going to happen. That's what the Indians said. So they said the next time we get slaves, we have to erase from their mind that they have a past. We have to erase from their mind that they had institutions. We have to erase from their mind that they had the first religious institutions in the world. The first educational institutions. The first social and economic and political and cultural. Had to erase that. Because your purpose in America was to work as a slave. So when these institutions started to grow and expand, there was conflict between them. Who was going to be the most dominant? Who? Kingdoms started in Africa. Ghana, Mali, Songhai Kingdom. You had gradually in Egypt the pharaohs. You had a brother by the name of Tariq. He was one of the pharaohs. Before he became pharaoh, he went to Spain and conquered southern Spain. Then he came back to Sudan. He eventually became pharaoh. And he gave the first recorded lecture that we know about on nutrition in the world. Tariq. We didn't even know his name. That had to be erased from your mind. Because if you didn't recognize and remember Tariq, you would not be eating so much junk food. Tariq was hard on junk food. When they got ready to attack him, he said, "Do not make that mistake." So we're not like others. We know how to prepare food. We know how to bring strength. We know how to develop our bodies and our minds. That was Tariq, just one of a whole stream of black history that had to be taken from your mind to make you a slave. So you had the Babylonians fighting, the Persians fighting. So some of the institutions melted together, others disappeared. First World War, Second World War. Institutions kept getting bigger, more expensive. Cold War, Hitler, Europe, Japan, China. The thrust for expansion of institutions. that's the backdrop. Now, are you ready for the message? That's the introduction. That's just to let you know where we are. Now, maybe not right now, but get ready, because you may have to hold onto your seats any moment. Now, I'll try to give you a warning. I will not take responsibility for any strokes that you may have, any overwhelming fear or trauma. I'm not taking any responsibility. You shouldn't come. Too late now. As the world continued to expand, you had a variety of isms: communism, authoritarianism. But you start getting trends and larger institutions. Now in the 21st century, these institutions are continually clashing against each other. Maybe you will never be able to reconcile them. Maybe it'll just cause humans to explode. You remember the discussion that Allah had with the angels in the Quran. And Allah said to the angels in Shaitan, I want you to bow down to the human. And he said, forget it. Not the human. Bow down to the human. He said, no, we're not, because he's made out of clay. We're made out of fire. Non-consuming fire. Clay will always dissolve. They're inferior. God said, listen, there are things you don't know. I taught the humans the defining characteristic of every class of plant and animal. They can reason deductively and inductively. You cannot do that. If you think you can, give me the defining characteristics of the plant and the animal kingdom. The angels fell down before Allah. Allah is great and Allah is merciful. But they said, look, Allah, these humans that you created, they're not going to work. They are going to kill. They're going to institute war. They're going to destroy each other. In the exercise of choice, they will do what we will never do. We will be totally obedient. But this human that you made, this is unbelievable. Allah permitted free will so that we could be responsible for our acts. But we will be judged by what we do. So now after the Second World War, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, you have now groups that never got along, forming a European common market. You've got the Pacific and Asian community forming a region. The Russians forming a region. It's happening all over the world, except within the black community in America. Some of clashes that are going to take place may be fatal. Some may be healthy, some may be tolerated, but you can't reverse the clock. If you look at humans being on this planet for 5 million years, the Industrial Revolution didn't kick on till 1750 AD. That was the time when we began to see that a machine could do more work. Technology and machinery should be the emphasis. We began to see that rotation of crops can make for a better nutritional diet. We began to see steam, so communications, transportation. Not long after that, you're going to the moon. the amount of time that this progress has taken in relationship to how long we have been here is like looking at a clock for 24 hours, and in the last 120 seconds, everything is taken off. The pace has been very slow for thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Now, it is advanced time. Your emotions. Young kids go to school, they can't hardly pay attention after 10 minutes. Because the computer game increases, accelerates the processing of the brain. So once you get used to that pace, then to go back and hear someone talk for 45 minutes, especially when they're unprepared, they don't know what they're talking about, you start wandering. So young people today keep telling the family they don't understand. We're talking about an acceleration. What is the impact on these basic 6 institutions? Today in America, after September 11th, you'll find 2 predominant schools of thought. One is represented by a professor at Johns Hopkins. His name is Fukuyama. I just saw him on television when I was in the motel. He had a book called The End of History and the Last Man. His position is, after studying all of the history of humans, the best system you can ever have is the system of democracy and free markets. We have conceptually reached that. There'll be some hiccups, there'll be some resistance, but no one is now going to go back to fascism or communism. The whole world, whether it's Africa, Asia, over the next 100 years will totally submit and embrace free enterprise and democracy. That's his view. I read his book. I have some problems with some of his assumptions. I think that some of the material is oversimplistic. I think that some of the philosophers that he holds out as scientists are rather metaphysicians. I think that they do not have a fundamental grasp of logic and reason, and therefore I feel comfortable questioning whether I should embrace this view that he is advancing. On the other hand, you have another professor at Harvard, Samuel P. Huntington. And Dr. Samuel P. Huntington advances the view that these institutions that we all know now, all 6 of them, are clashing and reclashing, reverberating and reverberating, and the only way that you will ever have any peace, lasting peace on this earth, is to destroy Islam. His book is called The Clashes of Civilization, Rebuilding the New World Order. He's saying you can't reconcile. His preference is to see if Christianity and Islam can get along. His preference is to see if the family outlook of Christianity and Islam can be merged. His preference is to see if you can reconcile the theology between Christianity and Islam. His preference is to see if a free enterprise system as envisaged by Christianity and Islam can be reconciled. His preference is that the culture of Islam and the culture of the West can be reconciled. His conclusion is it cannot happen. You will never get the Muslims to give up their belief in one God and accept a belief in 3 gods. 3 gods sounds like idolatry. If you just take it literally. 1, 2, 3. 3 is plural. According to Mr. Samuel P. Huntington, you'll never get the Muslims to accept free sex. You'll never get Muslims to take their clothes off in front of strangers. You will never get true Muslims to abandon their wives or their children, or let someone rape their wife and say, thanks be to God. And therefore, we'll never be able to reconcile. So the sooner we recognize this, the better. Now, I happen to believe that Professor Huntington is not the only one in the world who would like to see Islam destroyed. During the Cold War, there was an enemy, communism, that made a lot of people rich. Because you kept saying the communists are coming. They could be anywhere. There may be your telephone repairman. He may be a pinky, a red communist. So we have to give more money to Lockheed and the manufacturing of military arms. General Eisenhower, who knew the military well, while he was in office, he was quiet. After his term has expired, and he was giving his farewell, he said to the American people, I want now to tell it like it is. You better be very careful of this unholy alliance between the politicians and the industrialists who are manufacturing military arms. They're sucking up your money. That's what Eisenhower said. Now, if the Middle East has oil, and they have to pay all their money to defend themselves, they'll be broke. But where will the money go? Who is selling the arms? We're talking now reality. I happen to agree with this much of what the Professor Huntington had to say. Muslims are not going to give up a belief in one God. Not because we are arbitrary. We read. We look. We study. That's our obligation. But we want to know if we're going to give up the concept of one God for three gods. Why? That's all. The Quran says, ask for evidence. Don't get mad. Don't get emotional. Ask for evidence. If someone can show me by the evidence that I should give it up, I'm going to give it up. The Quran said evidence should guide our behavior. So what I want to know is if Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden and got caught, and God adjudicated their acts and punished them, well, why are you looking at me? I wasn't there. Don't tell me because what Adam and Eve did, I have to pay. I ain't paying nothing. I was not there. Had I been there, I would have been worse than Adam and Eve. I just wasn't there. So if someone bombs the White House, and you go down to Brazil and stop the first person you see and say, you are responsible, they're going to say, well, show us the evidence. Shut up! I have to show you anything. I am that I am. You did it, and you know you did it. You terrorist. And the young man says, well, I can prove I never left here. I've been here for all the 12 years of my life. So well, we're going to hang you anyway. Someone has to be responsible. So if it wasn't you, you probably knew you're going to die. Doesn't even make sense. Then, I'm told that God himself, also known as Jehovah Jireh, or Jehovah Elohim, or Jehovah, wrote on the tablets 10 commandments. Now, God didn't write everything, because you couldn't. With all the knowledge that he had, you couldn't. But let's say he gave 10 of the basics. So I said, all right, if that's the case, I want to read them. I'm not going to say what's not in my Bible. I don't want to read. I want to read it. And I read all 10 of them. And I didn't see anywhere where God said there's really 3 of us. Now, God is not going to keep that secret. Nothing that. Something critical. It's not something that important. You are not going to keep that a secret for 2,000 or 3,000 years. If Abraham heard the voice saying, "Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will shew thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and thou shalt be great. I will bless him that bless thee, curse him that curse thee, and in thee shall all nations of the earth be blessed." Genesis 12, 1, 2, and 3. That's in the Jewish Bible. It's in the Old Testament. Why then didn't he tell Abraham? And by the way, the 3 of us. You might not understand it because man's mind is limited. But accepted by faith, there's really 3 of us, and in about 1,500 years, I'm going to send one of the 3. He'll come down and he'll show you. Buried, in 3 days he rose. We know that he was supposed to stay in the ground as long as Jonah was in the belly of the whale. 3 days and 3 nights, right? So if he's crucified on Friday, Friday to Saturday is 1 day. Saturday to Sunday is 2 days. Sunday to Monday is 3 days. So if he rose on Sunday, he rose too soon. We're talking math now. Don't get emotional. Get emotional. Logic. The Muslims will not give up their religion because of the logic of the religion. Jesus said, "I'm coming again." Peter said, "Jesus, when are you coming? I want to know. Give me the week, the hour, just a clue. I want to be ready." Jesus said, "I don't know when I'm coming. The angels don't even know when I'm coming. The only one who knows when I'm coming is my Father." Now, if they're one, does God keep secrets from himself? Talking just logic. Not emotion. Emotion, you believe in it. If you hear it often enough and the right rhythm, it's like rap music. You don't know what they're saying anyway. It's just a rhythm. Another passage said, if you blaspheme God, you can be forgiven. If you blaspheme Jesus, you can be forgiven. But if you blaspheme the Holy Ghost, you can never be forgiven. If they're all one, if you blaspheme one, you blaspheme them all. And when Jesus said, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Thou forsaken me, was he praying to himself? And he said, "I've come to do the work of my Father." Why didn't he say, "I'm coming to do my work"? Trust me. Muslims will never give up logic. Muslims will never give up their commitment to education. In the Quran itself, there are 150 references to the mind, to thinking. The first thing the Prophet Muhammad heard was Iqra, 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 which means read, read, read. That's our heritage. We used to have it before we came to America as slaves. You don't believe that, do you? Read Blyden's book. He wrote it down. He even gave us the curriculum. Amazing. Christianity, Islam, and the African race. He told us that education among the Muslims throughout West Africa was compulsory. 7 years, our young black youth had to go to school. And at the end of the 7 years, they were given an examination that lasted 7 days. And if they passed the exam, they were given the title, the learned, and they were eligible for a scholarship to Timbuktu. That's from Blyden. No, the course that they had to take every year for 7 years and at the University of Timbuktu was logic and reason every year. Muslims and logic and reason were synonymous. That's the educational tradition that we've been denied. Education. That these said, even if you have to go to China for education, you go. Not for a wife, not for money, but for education, go. That's the importance. And Timbuktu, you have to read another book called Islam and Antebellum America, where the British Commission heard about a black man named Dr. Rashid in Jamaica. Dr. Rashid had been captured out of Timbuktu and enslaved. And when he came to the Caribbean, down in Jamaica, he went to the slave master and said, let's make a deal, because he was used to business. And he said, look, I can only do so much work for you from sun up to sundown, that's all I can do. But if you let me put up a medical practice, I'll split the profits with you. You'll make more than me working on this plantation. Slave master said, why don't we do it? That's how they find out about one of the most famous doctors in the Northern Hemisphere. Before 1860, he had performed medical heart operations. The first medical heart operation in America was performed in 1893 by Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, a black man. But another black man, Dr. Rashid, 40 years earlier, performed it in Kingston, Jamaica. Cataracts, removing cataracts from the eye. This is what he learned in Timbuktu, so they put down the curriculum. They talked about sailing boats across the Atlantic. We tend to believe that because down in Mexico, the Mexicans made these big statues of African heads. And when they asked, Cortez asked them, why do you have these big black heads up here? He said, these people came to teach us civilization. They came and shared. They came to taught us how to hunt. These people would make the statue so that they will never be forgotten. They didn't make any statues of Cortez. They didn't make any statues of Columbus. Go all over Mexico. When Cortez got to Mexico, there were approximately 25 million Indians, Mayans, and Aztecs. When he left, there were 2 million alive. Later on, I'm going to ask somebody, were the deaths of those people a form of terrorism? The family, the economic, the Quran says business is legitimate for you. So when your children grow up and they say, what should I be? You talk about business. And it says anyone that disrespects science is blasphemy. Because science and technology are the keys to knowledge. We're told to travel all over the universe for knowledge. Because in our travels, we find Allah. So our Islamic values, we feel very comfortable with. Some may try to distort those values. We Muslims may not live up to those values. But what Allah has prescribed for us prompts you to say without reservation, Allahu Akbar. This day art thine enemies in despair of thy religion. Fear them not. This day have I perfected for you your religion. I have completed my favor unto thee. And I have chosen for you, for your religion, El-Salaam. We're not going to give that up. Now let's get down to the most recent events, and maybe I'll stop. Maybe. This framework for those who want to destroy Islam after the Cold War. I'm not saying everyone wants to. I'm talking about a professor at Harvard, and an increasing number of people read the letters to the editor. They're saying drop nuclear on Afghanistan. The president said, now we want you to understand, this is not against a religion, this is just against terrorists. Islam said, show us the evidence. Now, I want you to know whether you like it or not, I am against terrorism. But only after I know what it is. I want to know what the people are talking about when they say they're against terrorism. And they don't want to answer. And get mad when I ask. What is it? They say, well, terrorism has something to do with hurting innocent people. What about me? According to W.E.B. Du Bois, 100 million blacks, not 5,000, 100 million were affected by the slave trade. And then you're going to say, we don't even want to attend a conference? Because they might discuss slavery? And someone might want you to apologize? I want to understand this globalization, New World Order. What is it? What's going on? What about colonialism? I have a simple question. When the North was fighting the South in America, which side was the terrorist? When Terry McVeigh bombed Oklahoma, the first thing out was it had to be a Muslim terrorist. And they arrested that guy from Jordan in London because his luggage got there late. They never apologized. When the Irish Catholics and Protestants fight, they don't call them Christian terrorists. They didn't call McVeigh a Christian terrorist. They didn't call the Ba'ath a Christian terrorist. So if you're not trying to destroy Islam, why do you use that name in vain? Is it a setup? We talking logic. Is Nelson Mandela a terrorist? Should we go and arrest him? He had a struggle to liberate his people who were being oppressed. Innocent people died. same as innocent people died in Hiroshima when the atomic bomb was dropped. That bomb didn't discriminate against soldiers and civilians. Are you telling me that Truman was a terrorist? And what about Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson? You celebrate their birthdays, right? But you know, Thomas Jefferson had a book. It was a diary. You ought to get it. Sometimes in people's diary, they say a lot of things. So I'll give you the name so you can look it for yourself. Notes on Virginia is the diary of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson said in that diary that black people are genetically inferior to white people. You want me to repeat that? So how comfortable are you when you are asked to sing praises to Thomas Jefferson? He said, don't get mad at me. I did not say I'm repeating. Thomas wrote it. He said, if there is a God, I shake when I think of what we did to blacks. He said further, when I get to heaven, the first question I want to ask Allah is, why did you make the black human being? Because they're so ugly. You have some Negroes running around there in Virginia trying to prove that they have some relationship genetically with Tom. They're so proud. They don't know whether it's true or not, but they don't make any difference. It's just a possibility. And the man said, you're ugly. He said, you're genetically infected. Say, okay, what he said. Now, it's not like someone is claiming that Thomas Jefferson's mother was black. So you can say he was intelligent, and we're claiming that genetical stream of intelligence. You're talking about his raping, if he did it, a maid. So I'm so glad he raped a maid. Can you imagine the perversion that has creeped into our psyche as a result of slavery? You have to read a book, Bullwhip Days, to find out what really happened to us during slavery. From the mouths of the slaves, Bullwhip Days. It's a book that interviews a whole hundreds of slaves, and they tell you what it's really like. But they don't want you to know that. So my question is, what is terrorism? And then secondly, who decides? Because this New World Order, when these institutions are becoming more and more dominant, I want to know who's going to make the decision. And I want to know what kind of decisions he's made in the past so I know whether to run or to hide. And if I find a history of decisions that related to racism, and a history of decisions that was bathed in the blood of my people, the first humans on the planet, if I find a history that I want to be asking for evidence, just gonna say, hey, who is the terrorist? What do you mean and who decides? Because if every country, everyone's against terrorism. That's like about being against drugs. You say war on terrorism, war on drugs, it's the same. Everyone says, yeah, that's right, but what does he mean? It's like Reverend in church. He preached. What did he say? I don't know, but I know he preached. Don't get caught up in the emotions. I call the emotions the Negro E.T., Negro emotional time. I call logic and reason the Zulu principle. Who decides? Does England decide? Does France decide? Does Russia decide? Because one, you may be saying, is in the New World Order, the globalization of institutions, religious and intellectual, social, economic and political and cultural, whites will side. Is that what you're saying?
I happen to know that the president of Nigeria called
The White House. He said, I'd like to come and present some condolences. They said, we'll just leave.
What is this coalition? Who are the permanent members? Who calls the shots? All I see is Bush and Tony Blair. And one day, Mr. Colin Powell said, we are going to give the world the evidence. Did you hear that? And the same day,
Condoleezza Rice came out and said he was giving his own opinion. It was not the official policy of the government. And they haven't done it until now.
now if you had so much evidence, that would be the first thing you do.
Like Iraq. And Iraq ran into Kuwait. Saddam Hussein said, if you look at the map, we used to own Kuwait before the colonial structure. That was ours. We're just taking back what we have had. The UN said it's a nice argument, you might be right, but right now it's too late. We can't go into that, get out. And if you don't get out, we're going to bomb you. That's it. That's the United Nations. Veto power. We know who has a veto.
There's not an African country with a veto power. And we are larger than India, China, Western Europe, and America combined.
But let me tell you something else. You ready? I'm trying to be brave now. This is going to be tough. Nothing wrong with bowing your head and getting scared. Honest expression of the emotions.
In 1967,
the United Nations looked at a war between Israel and the Palestinians.
and the United Nations,
including the Security Council, the same body that said to Saddam Hussein, get out or we'll bomb you.
that same body said to Israel, get out of the West Bank, get out of the Golan Heights, get out of East Jerusalem, and get out of Gaza.
And Israel said, why? And they said, based upon the evidence that we have reviewed, we have concluded you started the war of 1967.
That's why you keep hearing these phrases, occupied territories. That means they don't belong to you. But Israel continues to build settlements in those territories.
Now, do they drop bombs on Israel? No. We give Israel, U.S. taxpayers' money, about $3.5 billion a year. Is that giving comfort and being an accessory to terrorism or what?
If they're going to use American arms to bomb Palestinians, who's the terrorist?
The United Nations Charter recognizes the right of oppressed people to self-determination by any means necessary.
So they confuse the label. They say the Palestinians are the terrorists. Look at them throwing stones. They are trying to liberate their land the same as the Kuwaitis. Who is stopping it?
So when my friend came over here with $10 million and said, you got all these people dead, you should take this and help them. But also I want you to know that one of the causes of terrorism is the slaughter of Israelis in Palestine. Giuliani said, no, you can't, I won't take the money.
Colin Powell said the same thing.
You cannot solve the problem of terrorism until you solve the problem in Palestine. So now I was looking for Giuliani to say all the money that the federal government was going to bring to New York, we're going to send it back. Politics.
And our leaders will not speak out at all. Every year, they give the Spingarn Award. Does anyone here have a Spingarn Award? Because I don't want to hurt your feelings. The NAACP gives out a Spingarn Award every year to the so-called most accomplished black, male and female. That award is named after Arthur Spingarn, who was the first chairman of the NAACP. And Arthur Spingarn was also a paid informer of the United States Army. And they paid him to spy on the NAACP, and he turned over 32,000 names to the Army intelligence. How do we know this? Through the Freedom of Information Act. All of the evidence is out in the open and clear. Now, before 10 years ago, the NAACP didn't know that, I'm sure of it. So I'm not going to hold them responsible for what they did in the 80s and before. But I talked to one of the presidents, the executive directors of the NAACP, because until recently all the presidents have been white, you probably know that. Now, the executive director is one, the executive director, chairman and president, these all been white until recently. Your leaders won't tell you. I simply asked, now that you know he was a traitor, forget race, I don't care what race or what religion, he was a traitor. Why would you give your most prestigious award to a traitor? Only slavery could mess up a people so badly. One time in Dallas, Texas, I was on the radio bringing this message out. And someone from B'nai B'rith, who identified himself as Jewish, said that's not true. Spingarn was not a traitor. And I said, well, sir, let's just talk about the evidence. Have you read freedom? He said, I don't care about the Freedom of Information Act, any of that. He was not a traitor. I said, what do you base it on? If it had been a traitor, the NAACP would not continue to give the award. That's the proof. I said, brother, I know that, and you know that. But until you tell them that it's all right not to give it out, they will continue to give that award out. I would ask everyone that has a Spingarn Award, turn it in, and I'm going to give you a choice. Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, whatever you want, to preserve the dignity of the race. Ladies and gentlemen, the New World Order is clashing institutions. China has a role to play. China did a study, you may have read it, in Nature magazine. It was a study done by University of Texas and the University of Beijing. It was to try to find out where the Chinese came from. The conclusion was the Chinese originated in Africa. I don't want you to know that. You know that Great Wall, everyone that goes to China, you want to see the Great Wall. You know that was built during the days of the Ming Dynasty. But did you know that the founder of the Ming Dynasty, Emperor Wu, father was a Nubian from Sudan, and his mother was a Mongolian. And he was a Muslim. Did you know that the first inhabitants in the Middle East were black? I want to show you a book the next time I come back called The Sons of Ishmael, so you can see. When you go to Mecca for Hajj, you will see in Medina Salih, it's about 150 miles from Mecca, a big black head up in the mountains. And you ask the people, who is that man? He said, he is the nephew of the prophet Abraham. He came from Ishmael. That's why they had to erase this. Why did the Arabs astronomy, building techniques?
Because they were related.
How do I know that?
You have to ask for the evidence.
Because of Uthman el-Jahis,
Who wrote a book called The Glories of the Black Race. And in 800 AD, he described the history of black people globally. Did you know that the Chinese said that the Shang dynasty, that's the first dynasty of China, was inaugurated by blacks? Did you know that the Chinese said when civilization came to China, it was brought by the blacks? Did you know that the first inhabitants of the Philippines, Negritos, black, just like Fiji?
this is our heritage.
Did you know 8,000 BC, 8,000 BC, the first mature civilization was in India? According to El-Jahis, that civilization was started by blacks who came from Africa, both to Arabia and across the Indian Ocean, called the Harappians.
They had houses 2 stories high. They had shopping malls. They had waste disposal units. In the ground,
Every home had a toilet, 8,000 BC. How do we know this? The British were using the wood from the development to build a railroad in India in the 19th century. And they stumbled onto these ruins, and hence we know the Harappian society looked like us. I got a picture of one of the rulers in one of my books called 7 African Arabian Wonders of the World.
You have to know this history. Your children have to know this history so that we have a meaningful place in the new world order, and as the globalization takes place, we will make our contribution.
From Timbuktu, all over the world, a great history. Did you know what else El-Jahis said? El-Jahis said that the Prophet Muhammad was black. You want me to repeat that? El-Jahis wrote 120 books during his lifetime. Considered one of the greatest scholars. If El-Jahis had said that in the early 9th century, and that had not been true, he'd be dead.
They would never.
Let this man live lying on the property.
Why did he say it? And why did he live after he said it? That's some evidence.
To be probed. Of course, you know Jesus was blind. John saw it. I didn't see it. John saw it. John was on the Isle of Patmos.
He said, I saw Jesus.
I knew him. We walked together for 3 years. And his skin was like burnt brass. And his hair was like lamb's wool. I didn't make this. But today, most Christians are white. Most Muslims are people of color. I didn't have anything to do with that. According to the United Nations, in approximately 50 years, the total white population, that means Russia, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, America, and the few rulers in Latin America, will be no more than 8% of the total population of the world. 8. People of color will be 92. How can 8 rule 92? Unless they do it the way they did it in India with the caste system, by ruling your mind.
So when you have terrorism and you don't define the terrorist, you don't say who has the authority to determine who is the terrorist and what is the punishment, who decides that, you may be
setting the stage for the last conflict. The last conflict. I hope it doesn't happen, because we're people of peace. W.B. Du Bois said the last conflict will be a color. I hope not. But if you keep pressing religions and race, people are going to look up and say, this is just like colonialism. Who's making all the decisions? You say, we'll give you $5 billion, you make a shilling for a couple days after we kill some people, no more for you, you go back to your place. It ain't going to work in the 21st century.
We need serious, honest leadership.
Colin Powell, he's kind of messing stuff up now. Before he said, if they try to cross me, I'll resign. You can't resign now because that's like AWOL. You stuck. Whether you like it or not, you stuck.
Your leaders sold out a long time ago, so they can't say anything.
But you cannot stop the momentum of the world. And so I'm therefore saying to whites, blacks, and all races of people, Islam is the answer. Because the Quran said Allah made the colors as a manifestation of his diversity. We don't believe in racism. We don't believe, but the Quran said Allah made the tribes and the nations. And Allah never said they should be destroyed. He said he made them so that we would know each other better. So if I'm going to give a speech in China, if I know it's China, I can prepare Chinese history so I'll be able to communicate better. But if I don't know where I'm going to speak or to whom I'm going to speak, I won't be able to prepare as easily. So Allah made the tribes and the nations, and he made all the colors. We're prepared to accept all the colors because they've been made by God. So we don't have a problem with that. But it seems that some, at least, of them have problems with black. And the blacker you are, the greater the problem. There's an expression in Panama. It says, el color es accidente, pero pelo no miendra. The color is an accident, but the hair does not lie.
So those countries that want to know what might happen.
Look at what happened with the declaration of war. Look what happened in Haiti. The United States does not have enough money to take care of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Haiti, and half the world, and Israel too. In 60 years, this country is going to be predominantly Hispanic and black. Are you going to vote for money to go to Israel instead of Africa? Will the Hispanics vote for money to go to Israel instead of Latin America? They may say Israel may be entitled to something if they're not terrorists. We don't want terrorists getting anything. But other than that, the priorities have to be established. That's logic and that's reason, and that will bring the world together. Transparency, nothing hidden. No racial. Not saying, Colin Powell, you stay here in the United States, and we're going to make Tony Blair to act like the Secretary of State, and he will go and tell the other countries. Tony Blair said the evidence is compelling. What did Colin Powell say? The evidence is pretty good. You're going to kill innocent people on pretty good evidence? These are just facts, ladies and gentlemen. Now I'm going to close now for real. Telling you that if you really want to bring about change in the world, globally, to participate in these global institutions that are clashing continually and dominance is emerging, the way to do it is very clear and simple. It's the precepts and concepts of Islam. You have to teach your children to acquire an addiction for education. Computers, science, engineering, that's the key. Black men have to take care of their families and especially their wives. We have to teach ourselves business and pursue it vigorously. We must keep our word in business. None of that jiving that you learned during plantation days. If you give your word, keep it. That makes our businesses thrive. Ramadan, one of the most incredible institutions in the world. As soon as you start fasting, you can run any day and miss a meal. You miss a meal, you don't think about it because you're in a hurry. The first second of Ramadan, you know when you missed a meal. Because your body starts crying out for food and nutrition. It makes you think you're going to perish. The whole psychology of survival comes into foreplay. This is silly. This is old-fashioned. Those crazy Arabs, they shouldn't have done this to you. You know the Arab constitutes only 10% of the whole Muslim world. You know that? Indonesia is the largest. But they keep on talking about the Arabs for a reason that we won't go into today.
Ramadan, the body cries out for food, and the mind says, I have made a promise to Allah.
And body, you're just going to have to behave. Mind and logic and reason is in charge. Logic and reason said if you made a promise to the creator of the universe, there's nothing to discuss. You are going to keep that.
At the end of the 30 days, your mind now is stronger. Since you've avoided gossip, you avoided frivolous conversations, you have fed your mind brain food. So your mind gets stronger, your sense of discipline becomes stronger, your emotions can be controlled.
And you pass that on to your children. So your children start saying, I want to be like my mother and my father, because they're not only polite and nice and gracious to each other, but they have taught me the proper way to live. My brothers and sisters, it's been a great pleasure. I want to congratulate all of you for joining in behind Brother the Imam Omar, Sharif, and all the other leadership here. You're doing an excellent job. Do not get discouraged, because this is our day. Ladies and gentlemen and brothers and sisters, thank you very much. As-salamu alaykum.
Carry on too much further. As you can probably smell, probably notice, there's a lot of food. I think the way they distributed the tickets, the dinners are like $6, and it's a lot of food. We here, and we in for the long haul. At least I know I'm here for the long haul, so we might as well go ahead and keep with the continuum that's going on. So with that, I want everybody to know there is food being prepared. As I said, they prepare. It's the South, so you know how you do it. So it's plenty of food. The other thing is, we do have a few of the books, a few of Khalid books. I believe the title is this particular one. It's Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race. Oh, I'm sorry. But this is one of them books that he endorsed as good reading material. So we do have that book, and I think the price is $25. Get one myself.
Come a time when murder would be on the increase, and the man who is killed will not know for that which he is killed, and the man who killed him will not know for that which he killed him. And so we live in a time in which we bear witness to this, that the beastly nature of man has been motivated to a point where his spiritual self is out of control, because there is no realization of his spiritual self, of the remembrance of Allah in this life and the promise of the hereafter.